Today is Sunday, April 13th, 2025, and this is episode 303 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat.
Good evening, Jerry, sir. How are you?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. My weekends tend to go by too fast, but that's okay.
I understand. They're all weekends to me now.
Well, life goals. We can aspire.
Yeah, that can't stay the case forever. I've got to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up now.
Yeah, that's bills just keep coming. I understand.
Yeah, speaking of bills, we're gonna introduce you to our new sponsor. So we're gonna take a break and let you listen to our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by VitaSup Max, the cutting-edge nutritional supplement that's packed with energy, focus, and scientifically questionable ingredients that the FDA hasn't gotten around to banning yet. Are you tired, sluggish, struggling to lift your car over your head like you should be able to? VitaSup Max combines proprietary adaptogenic compounds, high-impact thermogenic accelerators, and just a whisper of experimental stimulants to help you unlock your true potential. Early users report explosive energy, laser-sharp focus, and occasional hand tingling that we're 85% sure is just fine. But don't wait. Stock up now before the regulators start asking too many questions. Visit vitasupmax.com/podcast and use code TOOFAST for 25% off your first order. VitaSup Max, because if it were dangerous, wouldn't someone have stopped us by now? Okay, hopefully that was pretty cool.
Hey, look, this is a first-time thing for us. We've never done a sponsor before, but we really believe in this one. I know it's a big change for the show. I know you're not used to this, but life is expensive.
And look, I mean, the money was ridiculous. I paid off my yacht.
Wait, which yacht? You've got a few of them. The big one or the small one?
The medium-sized one.
Oh, the backup yacht.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Not the
Gotcha. Right. The one with the main yacht's in the shop yacht.
Exactly.
I understand. It's tough to keep track. You know that, right?
Anyhow, on a more serious note, we do, by the way, appreciate those of you who do support us through our Patreon account. Thank you very much. And if you are interested in supporting our podcast, you can go to our Patreon page at patreon.com/defensivesec and support us there, and we will be forever in your debt.
Absolutely. And for those who already do, thank you very much.
And then next, I will remind everybody that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers.
Especially those of us who are employed.
Exactly right. So let's go ahead and jump into some stories. And the first one today comes from Cybersecurity Dive, and the title here is Remote Access Tools Most Frequently Targeted as Ransomware Entry Points. This is an article about a report released by a company called AtBay. AtBay is a cyber insurance company. And while the article itself is interesting, I don't think they did an awesome job of summarizing the report. But I think the report itself is actually quite useful to talk about. So I'm mostly going to talk to the report. But there are a couple of interesting data points worth talking about. First is that the overall, keep in mind, this is the perspective of one cyber insurance company. Their overall claim frequency increased 16%, which I think just highlights, that the trend continues to rise for attacks that result in a loss that requires companies or enables customers to file a claim. Email continues to be the most common initial entry vector. By the way, you miss this point if you just read the article.
Yep.
So email continues to be the most common initial entry vector, triggering 43% of claims.
And to be clear, Are they saying malware over email or some sort of social engineering attack over email?
I think it's all of the above. So they say that
Okay.
83% of financial fraud claims, which I assume are things like the business email compromise type of, the CEO, CFO email scams, the changing of bank account numbers and that sort of thing for suppliers, that sort of thing. But as compared to ransomware, which is only 6% of ransomware cases use email as the initial entry point, which says that I suppose there are other types of malware attacks that can be delivered via email, like perhaps keyloggers and whatnot. But at least as it pertains to ransomware, it's relatively low.
Which is surprising to me because email born social engineering to gather credentials to then launch a ransomware attack is pretty common.
Correct. I suppose if you use an email attack to trick a subject into giving up a credential that results in financial fraud, that would still be caught into that 83%.
Yeah, that's fair.
Let's see, direct ransomware claim frequency returned 2021 levels. So there had been a dip. I don't know if it's due to the pandemic or what, but anyway, there was I think 47% or 46% increase in a 47% increase in severity. So 46% increase in frequency and 47% increase in severity of direct ransomware attacks. Like direct ransomware is where you as an entity are the victim of ransomware, as opposed to indirect, which is where one of your suppliers or business partners is ransomware and somehow that harms you. And then the money bullet point, which the initial article talks about, remote access tools were the initial entry vector for 80% of direct ransomware claims. And I'll give you the spoiler that remote access tools are the combination of VPNs and remote desktop protocol access.
Yeah, it makes sense. I was reading this too, and I wonder if there's a bit of bias because remote access tools are going to be exposed, right? They're meant to be exposed. So there's a bit of that's where the money is kind of aspect of this. But also, I think we just see a common problem with people running them securely or accurately or ensuring MFA is enabled and that sort of thing.
Exactly. I think that the way I would look at it is if you have a fixed amount of money to spend on security, which everybody does, this is an area where you want to make sure that you've allocated the right amount of focus and resources.
Yeah, and it's another area too where I think of this in terms of attack surface awareness and management. If somebody stands up something that's got Windows host out there with remote desktop turned on and you don't know about it, that's a problem. So being aware of changes in your environment or scanning your environment for changes, things that are open from the outside, I think is important.
And then the next is supply chain risk continues to rise as indirect ransomware claim frequency increased by 43%. Again, this is the case where one of your business partners is the actual victim of the ransomware attack. And they point out the example of CDK Global. So for those of you who don't recall, CDK was the big company whose ransomware incident resulted in a lot of car dealerships not being able to do their thing.
Do they account for how much time and energy is spent filling out spreadsheets when these things happen?
It does seem like it should be its own loss category. Let's see. So, what other little bits of nuggets in here? There was a very interesting inset that I did want to talk about quickly. Trying to get down to it, and it's titled "The Backup Wake Up Call." And I won't read it verbatim, but basically they pointed out that in 2023, their experience was that 90% of their insured clients had had offline backups in place to help recover from a ransomware attack, but 25% of those cases were not able to actually recover because of various issues with their backups. And so they point out that they worked with their customers because again, they have a financial incentive to help their customers be able to recover and improve that situation. But I think the point that I wanted to highlight. Like, this is like these 1980s basics. Test your freaking backup.
Yeah, but you know who does? Nobody.
Well, you do once you try to restore after a disaster, and you
Right.
can't.
Right. That's what these ransomware events are. They're just, restore test opportunities.
It's like the cybersecurity chaos mode.
It's true. Which is a concept we haven't talked about in a long time, but I still enjoy it.
Yes. So let's see. Any other points that you found interesting in
You
this?
hit everything I had notes on, and the backup and restore thing is interesting. And I think that's such a moving target with today's, especially cloud first systems out there. Now, there's systems being made available to help you with that. I know that we've talked a number of times on the show too of, hey, companies had backups, but they calculated the time to restore was unacceptably long, and it was much cheaper from a time to money perspective to pay the ransom and restore that way than it was to restore from backup, which is another interesting problem. In our initial foray into the world of IT, we used to do tape-based backups that we used to send off-site to
Mm-hmm.
secure storage facilities, and our backup times were marked in days, sometimes weeks. It was just a different world. But nowadays, people, their time to recover is so low, or at least theoretically, that it feels like a lot of people just take the risk, roll the dice, and say, well, we'll do what we can without it. Or they think they have backups until they need to restore and they don't. But it's tough to, in today's sort of emphasis on AI and cost cutting and doing more with less, at least as I see it, having the time and the staff to do a full disaster recovery test with restore from backup seems a luxury, which is unfortunate. I think we should be doing it more often.
Yeah. I completely agree. It is a sickening feeling when you go to try to restore in the aftermath of any kind of a disaster. It could be ransomware, it could be just a something as benign as a server dying, and you're not able to restore. That is just a terrible feeling. I would like to think there are lightweight ways that most organizations adopt to get some level of confidence that their backups are working correctly.
Well, some organizations feel they've got a good failover hot scenario where they're running multiple instances that automatically fail over. Now what gets interesting is how valid are those assumptions and how often have they done a test of that DR scenario? Or is the ransomware hitting a DR scenario they didn't account for?
Right. And in the ransomware case, there's a difference between a disaster where a volcano erupts underneath your data center, your primary data center, and a ransomware attack, because a ransomware attack is going to corrupt both your primary, depending on how you set up your system. A ransomware attack is going to corrupt your both of the hot system.
Right. So if your hot failover is based on geographic outage, not system compromise, that can be an interesting problem.
So good article. I think insurance companies give an interesting perspective. This particular company also does some security consulting things, so they seem a little more savvy than perhaps the insurance company. So good report. Enjoyed reading that. Hopefully y'all find that useful. So we have next an update. I would say the update on the Oracle not cloud.
I feel like we need its own theme music like the news has for an ongoing story.
Yes. So this one comes from Dark Reading, and the title here is Oracle appears to admit breach of 2 obsolete servers. I think this is the 3rd or 4th week in a row we've covered this crazy story where Oracle, I think most of the world understands that Oracle experienced a breach, but Oracle continues to issue statements that say our cloud has not been hacked. And I think part of the issue is that the initial actor seemed to either directly or imply, I don't recall which, that the server they hacked was associated with or was part of Oracle's cloud. And the only thing Oracle seems to be willing to say from their part, at least publicly, is that no Oracle cloud servers were impacted and no Oracle cloud customers were harmed. And that is kind of a funny way of trying to distract it from what actually happened, which apparently is that there were two, apparently, I think we understood that there was one, but apparently there were two servers that they're calling obsolete, which were clearly part of their authentication SSO program, which, as you may recall or may not, was running a very old version of an Oracle Fusion middleware package that had a remote code execution vulnerability in it that some actor had taken advantage of back, I think, in February or March of this year. And um, this has been the subject of lots of speculation because unfortunately Oracle's really not been forthcoming about what's been going on. But now there are reports that some customers have actually received a notification from Oracle about the breach. And it, I will say that it doesn't necessarily help matters a whole lot
Nope.
because their statement continues to reiterate that their cloud was not breached and that the data that was stolen was worthless. And
This is fine. This is fine. It's fine.
this is not the breach you're looking for. So
I happened to run into our friend Bob the other day, and he was telling me that after the first rumor mill went around on this, the company he worked for was getting third-party risk management requests from their customers asking if his company had been impacted by the breach. Now, what I find interesting about that is how could anyone have known, or how could anyone still know? So, random company triggers out a, hey, were you impacted by this, to another random company. How are they going to, like,
how do you
it's
answer
a nonsense, right? Especially in any sort of like accurate, legally binding way.
It's a great point. But I think that goes back to the issue of how do you trust? How does Oracle maintain a modicum of trust here? I don't understand.
Well, especially for you, who, I mean, your yacht was cut off by Larry Ellison's yacht, what, like 2 weeks ago
Well, I
in
do
the
have a bone to
Bahamas.
pick. I do have that bone to pick with him. Yes.
So I can understand why you are beating this drum. But for the average person, yeah, how do you manage your program if you have no idea what's going on? And I think this genie never goes back in the bottle. Like, we are so deep in this SaaS world now that that's never going to go away. And Oracle's so big though that I fear they're just going to not learn any lessons from this or be held to account for how poorly they've handled the comms on this situation. I think it's just going to be what it is.
The one thing I will say is that there are already commercials being run in some parts of the US advertising for victims of this breach and telling people that you might be entitled to compensation, which I find just to be a very American kind of thing. So I suspect that this is going to definitely be litigated, and I'm sure there'll be more to come. But I think we still don't really have a good handle on what the actual systems were that were breached, because again, Oracle is saying it wasn't part of cloud, their Oracle Cloud, and it was obsolete. But on the other hand, we have the adversary here providing data that was apparently as recent as 2025. We have customers who have confirmed that the data that was provided by the actor was valid. Now, there wasn't an indication from those customers of like how old the data was. So it certainly feels like Oracle's playing some word games, and I really feel like that's going to come back to bite them. I know it hasn't yet, but I just this does not give me a great feeling for the people there.
No, I concur. And you mentioned it's going to get litigated. I think more than likely it'll just get settled out of court with no admission of guilt or malice, and here's $20. Go away.
That's probably,
Sadly, the lawyers will make money.
well, they always do.
Maybe we should become breach lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get on that. I'm sure there's like an AI course we can take. It'll be fine.
You could play both sides, right? Do the breach and then do the.
That is brilliant. You know,
Because
could be.
I mean, who would have better insight on how to defend it than the people who actually committed it?
There are a lot of rumors for many years that some AV companies were putting out viruses for that very reason, but I don't want to go too far down that path. Certain AV company executives are known to kill their neighbors and then die in Belize jails or wherever that was.
Our next story comes from the Hacker News, and the title here is Explosive Growth in Non-Human Identities Creating a Massive Security Blind Spots. So we've talked quite a bit recently about leaking credentials, particularly in GitHub repos. This is yet another article about that, but I think there were some interesting data points in here that underscores the scale of the problem. So this particular report points out that GitGuardian found 23.77 million secrets leaked on GitHub last year, and that's up 25% from the prior year. Incredible.
That's insane. That's yeah.
They have this quote. I'll just give a quote because that's pretty good. Quote: "Most concerning is the persistence of exposed credentials. GitGuardian's analysis found that 70% of secrets first detected in public repositories back in 2022 remain active today."
Why would they be? Why would you rotate them?
Why would you rotate them? Indicating a systemic failure in credential rotation and management practices. And now, look, I think one of the challenges, there's at some level, a credential is a credential, right? But I think we don't treat them all the same, or a lot of organizations don't treat them all the same. For human-provided passwords and credentials, notwithstanding the people who misinterpret NIST guidance, we require password rotation.
Shots fired.
I'm still bitter. What can I say?
It's fair.
So notwithstanding that, human identities typically get the credentials get rotated, but much less common is rotating these non-human credentials, and that's typically because it's kind of a pain in the ass, and I'm not going to mince words there. And this highlights the downside to that. My belief is that when we design a system, we should be designing as part of that system an automated credential rotation capability.
Like every 6-7 minutes, you're thinking? Just
if that, I mean,
like a rotisserie chicken, or roller food at the grocery station or the gas station.
It's like the hot dog, just like the
right,
hot dog,
just constantly.
on rollers.
I think so. If it's good enough for Quick Trip.
Quick Trip, for those of you who don't know, is a very large gas station chain here who has all sorts of crazy food.
Lots of
Taqueritas. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the other issue, I mean, one is the persistence. Obviously, it's a problem that we have these credentials that never time out, and then we're leaking them at the same time. When you combine those two things, you end up with kind of a disaster. And I really don't feel like we have felt all of the pain as an industry that's coming down the line because of this problem.
I would agree. Yeah.
So, look, I would say you have to kind of look at the whole ecosystem, or the life cycle here. What this is pointing out is that the credentials aren't getting rotated. And I think that is something that needs to be changed, because look, what happens when you are the CISO or the security manager or even a DevOps manager, and you are called in on a Saturday morning and say, hey, look, our secrets are leaked through GitHub, or they're somehow they got exposed. We have to rotate our credentials because we have evidence that they're being actively attacked. And you haven't thought about how to do that without causing untold chaos in your application. My view is it really needs to be endemic in the systems that we're building. Now, it's hard to kind of retrofit, but my view is it's a worthy endeavor. Although, frankly, it doesn't pay the bills. Like, you don't sell more widgets because you're rotating your credentials.
Right. I agree 100% on all points. I think the tough part is, let's say you're a startup. You probably don't have the capital to go invest in some sort of secrets management system like, Vault or something. And once you're big enough to do it, now you've got this ecosystem that's grown with secrets in code and secrets in Git and in repos. And to your point, going back and retrofitting that is a big pain in the...
I don't know what to say about the startup. I do I do think that there are some free options, but I will say one of the biggest challenges that I've seen is lack of an organizationally standard approach. And so, in my experience, whenever I've had the pleasure of investigating or responding to the breach of credentials, when I've asked the people who are responsible, like, why did you do that? Why did you store the API key or the password in the source code? And the answer is nobody told me how to do it differently. And so that tells me that I think it's not necessarily just a training thing, but it's also a capability thing. If you have standard ways of doing things, I suspect it not only will make things more secure, but it'll also make things easier to maintain. And that tells me that there's probably a larger problem that you while yes, it would cost money to implement Vault and force people to make a change, but I think the reality is that that's probably an indication that you have, a not very well optimized development operation.
Sure. Or it's something that just wasn't on the radar of engineering and security hasn't had a chance to have that much of an impact yet, or they haven't gone
Right.
through enough breaches yet.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely
The
that.
yeah, the one thing that caught my eye as a old school fan of the X Files is they use the term non-human identities, NHIs, which in my world is non-human intelligence, and I was very curious how the aliens were going to help, and then turned out to be just not what I was hoping for. So, no help from aliens on this one.
Very disappointing. So the next point they raised is that private repositories are approximately 8 times more likely to contain secrets than public ones.
Sure, they're safe. Why shouldn't I put my secrets there?
And I suppose if it's just you or you and your closest friends that have access to it, it's probably not a big deal. But if you're any size company and you're providing those kinds of credentials to everybody in the organization, but you're just asking for trouble, not the least of which somebody clones the repository thinking that they're doing something helpful and publishes it online. Suddenly, it's not private anymore.
Nope.
And I will say that also dovetails into another problem, which is that I'm just going to skip around a bit here. This is something that when I was at the cloud, my cloud provider, I had a interaction with Wiz, and one of the issues they found was credentials found in container image. Now, if you were to deploy the container image and look for credentials, you couldn't find them because of the way container images layer themselves. If you create a container image that has credentials and then you go and you remove the credentials and then you recook that same image, those credentials are still there. And anybody who has access to download the actual image can go back through those layers and pull out credentials. And so if your source code, even those that's stored in a private repository, has credentials hard coded in it, and then that gets rolled into a container that in any way is available for download, it is very, very, very likely that people are able to get to it.
Which, again, this gets to be a very complex problem. To me, it starts at the very beginning of devs not being able to commit secrets to code at all, in some ways. So you almost have to invest in, and we talked about this last week, like companies like GitHub are making more of these tools available, detection of those secrets, pre-commit, and a warning. Now, if your devs choose to ignore that warning or whatnot, that's a different problem. But a lot of these problems have to be stopped at developer habit levels, I believe.
Now, one headwind in that, they point out that AI coding assistance like Copilot creates a 40% higher incidence of secret leaks in repositories. And so I think that is because the AI tools are not necessarily sophisticated enough to know, let me say that differently, because there are a lot of people who are very down on AI, and I think there's some legitimate reasons for that. But, if you ask an AI coding engine to create an application that does, XYZ, right? It's going to create that. Is it the engine's fault that it didn't? I'm struggling to communicate my thought here, but like if you want an extra button on the form, you don't say, well, gosh, the AI sucks. It didn't know I needed a button on the form. But here we are thinking like that the AI should know all of the ways in which it should create secure code. And so I think there's still this requirement for people who are using these coding tools to know the best practices and tell things like Copilot, hey, I need my secrets stored in a vault, not in the
Mm-hmm.
code. And I think that if you do that, for the most part, I'm sure that there's contra examples, but for the most part, you will end up with something that doesn't have this problem. I do think that this whole vibe coding trend is going to be a big problem because it, at least where we're at today, in the sophistication of these tools today, it still, in my estimation, requires people who understand the details of how to securely construct an application and other aspects of development as well, in order to be able to articulate to the engine what you want it to do.
Sure. Well, can't we just send the AI tool to like a SANS class? Just teach it? No, I could foresee a world where like a software architect gives a skeletal prompt architecture scaffolding that then less skilled developers could go vibe code in for whatever. I hate saying that. I could see that happening where you've got company wide prompts that address some of these bigger issues. But I don't know. I don't know enough about that world to really have a valid insight other than, if it's a vibe, can it be a secure vibe? Can't we just go, dude, the dude doesn't abide in secure creds. Am I getting it right? Is this how it works?
Yeah, I think you're there. I think you're there. So the next I think last big point is that while secrets in source code repositories is a big problem, they point out that secrets in collaboration tools like Slack, Jira, Confluence, and things like that are a larger problem, at least in terms of the severity of incidents that arise as a result of the that as a vector for the credentials to breach. So they point out that 38% of incidents are classified as highly critical or urgent as compared to 31% in source code management. Not a huge difference, and I question if that actually is statistically significant, but it is, at least in their estimation, a significant difference, which again points back to the concern I've got that this is a ticking time bomb that we haven't really yet experienced the full fury of. So
Yeah.
anyway, I think, again, I think if this is something that your organization wants to pay attention to, I think it makes sense to kind of map out, the life cycle of how you're going to protect tokens. And that starts from the capabilities that you provide to your development team, to the training, to the inspection of code before it gets committed, to making sure that your repositories are properly secured, to there's tools that obviously can help at every step, and you can spend, I'm sure, an infinite amount of money, which wouldn't make a lot of sense. But I think what we're seeing here is that this is bad and it's getting worse at an unsustainable pace. And so it might not be something that we're paying attention to, but I will bet you that if something doesn't change in 5 years, this is going to be all we're talking about.
I think you're right. There's one other point that I found interesting in the article too, and very quickly, just that they found most of the keys were very over provisioned and had far more permissions than they needed to have, which again, I think is just a common, hey, I'm a developer. Security is not really my problem. I just need the code to do what I need to do. And if that means I give it too many permissions, hey, it works. Pass my unit test.
Look, a lot of that comes down to like cloud control plane stuff. And sometimes that stuff, I'm not going to lie, is ungodly complicated. And so, you end up with this kind of crazy back and forth of experimentation. And is that time well spent. And I think a lot of organizations find that it's not, or they're taking advantage of things in ways like they're just taking shortcuts
I would agree.
that are probably are better ways to. Anyway, there's a report, kind of like the other article. This is a report that corresponds to this, which is it's worth reading. Well, so our next story comes also from the Hacker News. The title here is "Security Theater: Vanity Metrics Keep You Busy and Exposed." This is a fluffy article. I'm not going to lie, but it resonated with me, and so I wanted to talk about it because I don't feel like this is something I did a great job of
Awesome.
in my career. I have had experiences probably a dozen times in my career where new leadership comes in, and the new leadership, like senior leadership, like CEO or senior vice president leadership level, wants to see metrics. They want to they want to see meaningful metrics. And this is not a uniquely security based problem. What I've seen is that across the organization, people put together metrics that are easy to create, they're sustainable, and they're benign, right? And I think this is an example of that I don't think we spend enough time really figuring out how we measure, how we do a good job of introspection through metrics to be able to communicate our position. Now, I'm gonna, on the one hand, I say that, but on the other hand, I have made attempts to do this, right? But one challenge I've found is that the senior leaders don't have the time, attention, and interest in understanding nuance, right? What they want is something that's red, green, or yellow. They want to think about things in terms that they understand, which I think is why we always end up with dashboards to talk about how many criticals and highs and lows, vulnerabilities that is, that are overdue, and how how many how what percentage of our environment is being scanned and whatnot. And a big reason for that, quite frankly, is because it's easy to get. And not only is it easy to get, because we're all using Rapid7 or Nessus or whatever. Like we're all using stuff like that that has fancy reports that come out of it. But on the other side, it's also consumable by leadership. They the hard reality is most breaches aren't happening as a result of missed patches being exploited. They're happening because of things like credentials and misconfigurations and whatnot. And we have a hell of a time articulating, and I'll even go so far as to say like measuring that stuff. Like how do you communicate in a metric how how often you have identity issues? Like that's hard to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Anyway, I don't think this article has a lot of, in my estimation, revolutionary ideas. I think the company that the person who works for, that this person, the author here, works for, certainly has crap that they'll sell you to help. But I think this is one of those kind of pan industry issues that, like, I just don't feel like we've got settled. And this feels like something that is an area where we could do a better job of coming together. I know that there are industry groups like CIRA, the Society of Information Risk Analysts, and some others who are trying to come up with some methodologies. But the reality is they're very involved. And again, my experience is leadership doesn't really that like they don't want that level of detail. They don't like their view in every interaction I've had is like, why is it so hard? Why does it take that long for you to tell me what our exposure is?
Yeah.
Don't you know where your missing patches are, Jerry?
And why are they missing? This is another area that isn't directly addressed in this article, but I'm going to pivot off it for a moment of security teams being held accountable to remediation rates, which I find bad and bad practice because the asset owners are the ones who have to do the remediation. And I think the security team's area of competence is finding and exposing weaknesses and missing patches or whatever it may be, vulnerabilities is whatever it may be, and to hold the security team then accountable to that patch rate, that remediation rate, is nonsensical because the security team cannot control the asset owner, doesn't own the asset, and nor do they understand the prioritization or impact that may be happening on that particular team. So to me, one thing I've always tried to do is say, okay, my metrics around vulnerability management are around, and admittedly, they're called out here as not very meaningful. Do I have adequate coverage? Am I meaningfully communicating? Do I know things like, hey, is this internet exposed or not? Is there a known vulnerability or a known exploit or not? That sort of thing I try to communicate in terms of urgency and criticality and prioritization. But it drives me crazy when CISOs or whomever try to hold the security team accountable to making asset owners patch their stuff. That is a recipe for failure in my mind.
Yeah, you're beating on the wrong team. The correct team gets away scot-free. Now, I will say, I was a CISO and a senior executive, and I will say it is understood that your duty to the organization expands beyond your team. So, like, I, as a CISO, was responsible for the security of the platform. Even though the patching was done by another group, I was responsible for making sure that they did their job. And if they weren't doing the job, then I had to go and hoist them up by their underwear on the flagpole. Like, that was
Sure.
something. Now, if they don't want to do it, I think where that breaks down is when the business makes trade-offs. And this is where I ran into trouble. Right? When the business makes trade-offs, I'm still in the hot seat. Right? That doesn't go away.
Right. You still haven't mitigated the risk. But in reality, in that circumstance, that other team has chosen to accept that risk, but they're not accountable to choosing that choice.
Right.
And
So
that's a tough one.
yeah, the reason that
I
I'm
don't
not
know.
sad to no longer be a CISO, to be honest.
The other thing that frustrates me with this topic is you're right. We don't have a lot of breaches that are directly traced to missing patches, but we do have some. And we also have some breaches that are made worse by missing patches. And it's tough to, contrary to what some vendors will tell you, it's tough to predict that ahead of time. So sometimes it's safer to take a class of, or take an approach of patch everything because we don't know which ones are going to bite us. And that's difficult for business to accept. That's difficult. That's a difficult message to send from a prioritization standpoint. And so we try to be smarter about it. We try to add more intelligence and learn from other breaches and that sort of thing. But sometimes it's the stuff that you can't predict that becomes a chained attack that bites you. But let's say your policy is, hey, we don't worry about mediums and low CVSS scores. Well, you don't know when that might turn into a high or might chain into a high or suddenly turn into a remote code exploit. And that's the problem I have sometimes with these. We've got to be smarter. We've got to be more meaningful in what we choose to patch. You're not wrong. We suck at patching everything. But at the same time, it also seems to imply that we have perfect wisdom of which patches are truly the ones we need. I don't think we do, contrary to what the industry might tell you.
No, we certainly don't. And I think from the perspective of a business owner, they can tell you, like, it's completely unreasonable for you to expect that we're going to patch everything all the time within SLA. It's just not going to happen. And so like, okay, what's our next topic of discussion? What other unreasonable shit do you have for me, Jerry? So it's a difficult space, but I think it's an area where, especially in leadership positions, that I think we have to develop a much more refined approach to communicating our risk posture and identifying where the hot spots are that the business has to focus on without crying wolf too many times. We can't do everything all the time, so we've got to figure out where is the most important points to apply our limited resources? How do we communicate how well we're doing at that job? And then, what is the remaining residual risk?
Yep, I would agree. Best we can, at least. And to your point, by the way, I do think it is a security team's job to also report on those teams that don't meet their expectations, right? That we're the ones with the visibility into what's getting patched, not patched. So it is our job to report to leadership who's getting that done. It's not our job to make sure they get it done.
All right. Our last story today comes from Security Week, and the title here is AI now outsmarts humans in spear phishing. There's an organization that has been kind of gaming fishes created by humans versus those created by AI. And what this article is pointing out is that there's a trend line where, starting back in 2023, they identified that AI was about 31% less effective at getting people to fall for phishes than human created phishing emails. In 2024, that up again, and now in 2025, we're seeing that AI is now 24% more effective at creating phishes that people fall for than actual people creating the phishes. So, if you kind of plot that it creates a kind of an alarming trend. And I think one of the things that should also alarm us is the recent shift to agentic AI, where now it's beyond just interfacing with a chat console saying, "Hey, create me a phishing email that has the following attributes." Like you can tell it to go and troll LinkedIn and build a list of victims and you know identify the technologies that they're used based on job openings they have, and like kind of the sky's the limit based on the imagination of the adversary telling the AI what to do. But this is, I think, a very concerning trend. I don't know where it stops, but the one of the net points that the author makes here is that I'll read the quote. Actually, it's not the author; it's somebody they're interviewing. It says, "We've proven that AI agents can create superior spear phishing attacks at scale. Soon, the phishing as a service market will shift to mass adoption of AI spear phishing agents. Once that happens, the baseline quality and effectiveness of mass phishing campaigns will rise to a level we currently equate with targeted spear phishing attacks." So it basically means that the mass commodity broad net spearfishing attack, or I mean not spearfishing, but regular phishing attacks will have the same level of effectiveness as people who are specifically being targeted with a phishing attack, and that should alarm us.
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot, that we predicted this was coming. I think most people did. I don't think it's anything revolutionary for us to say that. And here we are. Now we're here. So it's going to get ugly. And it makes me wonder, what do we do? Do we stop using email? Do we stop trusting digital interaction? Do we just add so much friction to business process to stop this sort of thing? It's going to get really ugly.
It is going to get ugly, and I think it's going to drive the kind of change, frankly, that ransomware has driven to kind of the technical aspects of cybersecurity, right? Like, in the past, way back when, it was kind of you just, it was a one-off if you were a victim of an attack. But now everybody gets attacked all the time, and it's really just a matter of if you've got some weakness exposed that the many, many, many adversaries out there are able to identify and take advantage of. It has driven a very different approach to security than we saw 15 years ago, and a much higher level of investment.
Yeah.
I don't think it's obviously not going to be the same, right? But this is going to require a similar kind of pivot in how our business processes work, because this isn't necessarily an attack on like IT; it's an attack on process in
I would
most
agree.
regards.
Yeah.
And so I think we're gonna have to see some kind of revolutionary change in how business processes work to avoid this, because it's going to continue both in sophistication and volume.
It also makes me wonder how the email security vendors of the world are going to adapt. Are they going to be able to adapt? Are the proof points of the world going to be able to deal with this in any way, or are they just going to become completely ineffective?
I had this funny thought. I have many funny thoughts, but this particular one was relevant.
I think we decide if it's funny. You can have the thought.
So email security software will now start flagging things if the English is too good.
Okay, that is funny. Yeah, it's too formal. It's too proper. People are already starting to pick up, hey, this looks like it's written with AI. But again, that's easy to tweak. That's easy to just prompt away.
There's
The arms
certain
race.
common words that you
Yeah.
see AI use a lot.
The arms race around this is going to accelerate dramatically. And so I'm sure that the email security vendors will be, oh, we'll just add AI. Look at all this amazing technology we're building and adding. But in the real world, I'd be very curious to see. I think this is one where the bad guys are going to get ahead of the good guys for a little while.
And I don't know that it's entirely solvable by an email, or by an email security product, because by all accounts, the reason it's effective is because it looks like something that is otherwise completely legitimate. And so
And it's unique.
right.
Yeah.
How do you allow the legitimate stuff through and throw out the things that look legitimate but aren't?
Which, maybe we lose all trust in email, but I already see a lot of
Slack, and it's
right. It's all sorts of collaborative communication tooling. Agreed. Yeah, and I already see, we use a Slack or a Teams type system at work, and as soon as I start dealing with a vendor, they want to connect to me on that system too, because it's more invasive, by the way, and harder to ignore than their cold emails, and it drives me a little crazy.
Hey, Jerry, where's that bill?
Yeah,
your bill's unpaid.
Right. And I'm starting to not like that at all, and I'm starting to not really want external parties hooked up to my internal collaboration system at all. And I'm not quite sure how that's playing out, but right now it's feeling invasive when I suddenly get, in essence, sales spam via Slack or Teams.
So if one of those actors turns out to a malicious agentic AI bot is able to join your corporate Slack instance, could do a lot of data.
Yep. Or your vendor's Slack instance that's connected to yours in some way.
Yeah, good point.
That becomes a supply chain type attack through that collaboration system. Same thing we go with business email compromise, where somebody gets access to an email account that's all legitimate to send, fake stuff to use the reputation of that sender. The same thing could happen easily with these sorts of things.
Okay, so I think in terms of what to do about it, I think obviously you have to continue to minimize some of the obvious weak points, like using strong authentication. And I don't mean like a 15 character long password. I mean things like passkey that are hard to spoof, and device ID credentials, not just user credentials, identifying key business processes that could result in meaningful loss, and supplement those. Because again, we can't necessarily, we could, right? We could grind the business to a halt very easily, but whether we've solved one problem and killed the patient.
Right. It's a good point. So you've got to add the right level of friction to the right amount at the right time to stop these things without making the business unable to function. And right now, everybody's saying, go faster, do more. So I honestly think there's probably going to have to be some nasty real world impact before most businesses are going to adapt to this problem.
I think you're right. Look, this is not different than the DR problem, or the backup tape problem, where companies don't want to invest. They don't want to swallow hard and make the painful changes until they've suffered a loss. Just the way it is. Now maybe at some point, people or organizations like insurers and regulators and whatnot will come in, but the reality is those typically are so far behind the power curve that I don't think they're going to be the place that really meaningfully helps.
Well, inevitably, some company is going to offer an AI systems monitoring that will monitor all of your business processes for abnormal business process as detected by AI and flag it for you. So VCs can line up to the left. But that will be the blinky box we can buy to solve this. Right?
It's coming. You're right. It's coming. And now whether that is baked into like your Oracle your SAP system or what have you. I think it would be hard to have a standalone one of those, but maybe I'm not thinking big enough. This is a big problem, and what I'm hoping to accomplish by covering it here is not just like hand wringing, but raising awareness. It's already a problem, but we're on a problematic path, and we've got to get ahead of it so that we're not caught off guard.
Yeah, and this is email. What happens when we pair this approach to deepfake technology?
Yeah, there's some indications that this is being used to fake phone calls. So basically spoofing voices, which I think is a big problem because a lot of organizations have adopted processes that say, look, you've got to authenticate the person that you're talking to by, or that you're communicating with by talking to them. And if you know your CFO's voice because you worked with them for a long time and you talk to him on the phone and yep, it's the CFO that is telling me to do the thing, but it's not actually the CFO. That's a problem.
Well, you just got to issue everybody a password that you store in GitHub and you never rotate it.
There you go. We're gonna have to have like everybody's gonna have to have a public private key assigned to them and do like a key exchange.
Yeah, just give everybody one-time pads and like it's like nuclear launch codes. You break open the case and you get your one-time key that you authenticate with every time you interact with another employee.
Code book. Anyhow, this is a developing area. I'm sure we'll be talking about it more as time goes on, but there's no silver bullets here right now. But I think be aware and start thinking about how this might impact you.
And good luck. Godspeed.
Godspeed. I think, by the way, I think this is going to become a bigger problem for the consumer level. So I think we'll first experience it at a personal level. Like, it's going to be hitting people trying to get into your personal bank account. And even there, I think it's going to be hitting the elderly and whatnot. I don't want to get into all of the details about that, but I think we probably will start to experience some of this outside the context of organizations. But, look, bad actors are hitting companies because that's where the big bucks are. You can clean out 1,000 people and make $1 million, or you can make $10 million by hitting one company. And I think that's kind of the evolution that I expect we'll see.
And we're wasting our time doing podcasts. We should be doing that. What are we doing?
Well, got my yacht. Anyway, that is the show for today. All roses and sunshines and kittens. You have kittens. There's none around me, so end the show on a high note.
Same. No cats in the office right now.
But look, I appreciate your time. I hope this is useful to you. I think that despite what's happening, the bullshit that's happening in the economy and the world at large, security remains super critical important. And I appreciate all the thankless job that you all do. Even if your organization doesn't, keep fighting the good fight. I hope you all have a great week. You can find links to the stories we talked about on our website at offensivesecurity.org. Just look for episode 303. One more thank you to our Patreon sponsor. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll ask you to tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, and ditto to all those good vibes, by the way. I will just add very quickly. You and I have been in this industry a long time. We have seen a lot of stuff. We've been through the dot-com bubble. We've been through 9/11. We've been through recessions. We've been through all sorts of stuff. And it may sound trite to say this, but when you've gone through enough ups and downs that we have, maybe it gives you a little more perspective that this too shall pass. but it will be different. Every time it's different. Just take care of yourself and yours. But with that, you can find me on your amazing Mastodon instance, infosec.exchange at lerg, L-E-R-G. And you can also find me on X at lerg, L-E-R-G. And I'm on LinkedIn, though it's tough to get me through the throngs of salespeople sending me tons and tons and tons of sales pitches all day long. But, you can look me up there if you want.
I have a funny LinkedIn anecdote. I get probably 2 or 3 messages per day from recruiters, not offering me jobs, by the way, not offering me jobs, but offering me a slate of candidates who are looking for work. Because as I sit here in my basement, unemployed with no income, apparently I'm in a perfect position to go hire some high-end security people.
Don't you tell them you're looking for yacht staff, not security people?
I need to do that. I should try that next time. Anyway, you can find me on infosec.exchange. That is the domain name. It's at Jerry at infosec.exchange. I'm also on LinkedIn. It's malicious link is my name on LinkedIn. I find that funny when people look that up and quickly close it because they've hit on something.
Maybe that's why you're not getting job offers.
Could be.
Maybe you should change it to like friendly link.
I think you cracked the code right there. Anyway, thanks everybody. Have a great week. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks. Have a good one, gang. Bye-bye.